Welcome. I'm Heidi Brooks, and this is the last episode of the third season of Learning Through Experience. In this session today, we're going to pay attention to learning through the experience of writing and how writing can keep us company. As you probably know already, I love to pay attention to the power of the arts to help us learn through experience and notice our experience and refine our capacity to see. Today, we're going to pay attention to writing. In the echoing of the fall course that I teach, part of the intention here is to echo the reflective writing that's part of that practice and that course. And students there are writing for themselves, to themselves in journalistic style. And yet I hope that this episode might help us to pay attention and help anyone who cares about writing as a process to pay attention to writing for the self versus writing to be read. They're related, and both are ways to learn through experience. I'm really delighted to introduce or to have this guest who won't need an introduction for many, many people, Amy Bloom. Amy Bloom is quickly becoming not only one of my dearest friends, we live near each other and spend a good amount of time together, but really is, I think, deeply entrenched as one of my favorite writers. I knew her as a friend first, and so I've been really kind of obsessed recently with reading her. Amy Bloom is an American writer and psychotherapist. She is a professor of creative writing at Wesleyan and has been nominated for National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award. She's the author of the international best-selling memoir, In Love. And I have a copy of it here, which I'm showing on screen. It's such a beautiful piece. I wrote to her right after I read it for the first time. I felt wrecked and renewed. It is such a powerful experience of this book. I just read it for the third time, finishing it this morning. The first time I really was reading it for content, powerful story, real, true story of her husband, Brian's early-onset Alzheimer's and his and their decision about his life and death. It's also a powerful invitation to see people's experience and something we don't talk about, loss, but also deep love. She's also written 3 novels, White Houses, Lucky Us, and Away, all New York Times bestsellers, and 3 collections of short stories, Where the God of Love Hangs Out, Come to Me, and A Blind Man Can See How Much I Love You. What a great title. And she's also written a book of nonfiction called Normal. She's a psychotherapist and just a fascinating human being. I'm delighted to welcome Amy Bloom. So Amy Bloom, welcome to Learning Through Experience.
I am glad to be here. It's the best kind of learning.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. And I want to give you a little bit of context of what we're doing, because we're going to do a relatively short and focused interview. Let me give you some context for what we're doing this season. So this podcast itself, I'm in a pedagogy of learning through experience. In other words, I don't really teach to introduce people to a body of knowledge so much as I teach to create an experience so that they can create experiences for others, because I really teach in the leadership space. And so this season, we were echoing this course that I teach called Interpersonal and Group Dynamics. It turned out to be a kind of a distant echo, but the course has in it a lot of reflective writing. Where they have a pretty intensive lab experience where they're learning about themselves and each other in interpersonal and group dynamics, and they do a lot of writing. And so I thought you and I might be able to talk today about writing for yourself and writing to be read, and kind of broader audience topic. And I was hoping that people could also have an experience of you, which is part of my favorite part of life right now is experiences of and with Amy Bloom. So I wonder if we couldn't start by hearing your voice from your reading.
Sure. This is my most recent book, which is a memoir. Sunday, January 26th, 2020, Zurich, Switzerland. This trip to Zurich is a new, not quite normal version of something Brian and I love, traveling. Road trip, train ride, ferry ride, airplane, anywhere. We like all travel and most shopping, And this trip to Zurich has all the accoutrements of our other trips, and it is also nothing like anything we've ever done. As we usually do, we take a car service to the airport so we can be fancy and also avoid the park and schlep. And even before Brian had Alzheimer's, our combined lack of direction adds 20 minutes to all transportation transitions. We have a restaurant meal before our 6 p.m. departure. I buy a stick of lipstick and a small tube of hand cream. Brian buys some candy. We share gum. We share a bottle of water. And on the plane, we enjoy the settling in, the attention of the flight attendants who already like us because Brian is mindful about his size and he doesn't swing his arm into someone else's drink. And he expresses appreciation to every single Swissair representative. We seem like people who will not be screaming for more booze or more peanuts at midnight. No one loves business class more than people who always fly coach. We are smiling, and from the moment we board, I arrange our business class pods. We are gushingly polite to the attendants. It's obvious that we like each other and are happy to be traveling together. And as soon as we get our beverages in glasses, we toast my brother and sister-in-law who are paying for our business class trip to Zurich. Dignitas's office is in Zurich, and that's where we're headed. Dignitas is a Swiss nonprofit organization offering accompanied suicide. For the last 22 years, Dignitas has been the only place to go if you are an American citizen who wants to die, and if you are not certifiably terminally ill with no more than 6 months to live. This is the current standard in the United States, even in the 9 right-to-die states, plus the District of Columbia, about which many older or chronically ill Americans harbor end-of-life fantasies, and which I researched at Brian's direction, until we discovered that the only place in the world for painless, peaceful, and legal suicide is Dignitas in the suburbs of Zurich. So to give you some sense of who we were before we got to that point, this is how we met. September 2005, Durham, Connecticut, a very small town. Brian and I fell in love the way some middle-aged people in unhappy partnerships and small towns do. Liberal Democrats in a Republican town, ethnic types in a town full of Northern Europeans, opinionated loudmouths, and the people who were willing to run the Durham Democrats' hot dog stand, hot dogs and apple cider, every September at the fair. I overlooked his bad haircut and aviator glasses. I'm sure he had to overlook my lack of interest in sports and my impatience. We had been walking together since our partners were not walkers and talking together in public at our local Democrats' breakfast club, and suddenly we found ourselves talking in private. He told me I was a 3-sport captain in high school, and I laughed. He said it would have been 4 sports, but you can't do lacrosse and baseball. Is that right? I said, and he took my hand. He said, what's your family like? I said, Jews from New York. You? He said, well, we're a football family. We have 3 Heisman trophies in my family. And I said, that's so nice. What's a Heisman? And he kissed me. And I kissed him back, and sensibly we avoided each other for the next year. And after that, and some martinis in New Haven at the end of the day, he asked me to take a walk with him. He said, I'm not stupid. I know how this will end. You'll tell me we should not do this to the people we love, or I'll tell you, and we will go back to our lives where we should be, and I will never get over this. Or we blow up our lives and be together. I just want to say this, he said, before we walk back to our cars. I know who you could be with. Someone rich, someone fancy, some guy your sister finds for you, but I know who you should be with. You should be with a guy who doesn't mind that you're smarter than he is, who doesn't mind that most of the time you'll be the main event. You need to be with a guy who supports how hard you work and who will bring you a cup of coffee late at night. I don't know if I can be that guy, he said, tears in his eyes, but I'd like a shot. We married. So that's us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for reading, for opening with reading. So, there's such intent intense content there. I've just been through my third reading of this piece. Just finished the third one this morning, and so I just want to acknowledge for anybody who's listening in, there's quite a story to pay attention to there, and yet that's not what we're here to talk about. We're not here to talk about the content of that story. We're here to talk about and get to know you, Amy, as a writer and as someone who might be able to help us think a little bit about writing for yourself and writing to be read. But maybe we could start with, how did you get to all of this? Like, this is called learning through experience. So what experience in life sent you in this direction, or how do you know that you were going in this direction?
Well, the experience in life that sent me to the memoir was the experience of my life with Brian and his death. But the experience that sent me to being a writer, I think, was less obvious to me. But when I think about it, it is definitely the library. Mm-hmm. It is. I'm not sure that it's what people still think, but you cannot write if you don't read widely. And widely means not people who are just like you. It means not people who only reflect your experience. It's terribly important to see your experience reflected. It's terribly important to see yourself, your community, your family represented in work, but it is also really important to read good work that does not overtly resemble your own life or your own history. So one of the great reading experiences for me was Tale of Two Cities when I was about 10 years old, which made a tremendous impression on me. And I remember reading it. I was staying over with my grandmother. All of my grandparents were immigrants. And she looked at the book and she said, "Tell me what it's about." And I told her it was the heroic story of the French aristocracy. I thought my grandmother was going to throw me out the window. Is what she was thinking, which I could see on her face and which I could hear her muttering in Yiddish to my grandfather, was, "We did not come from Russia under difficult circumstances to appreciate the French aristocracy." But nevertheless, that book was enormously important to me, as was Little Women, as was a really very wide range of books in which I rarely saw myself as I understood sort of the demographics and the community around me, but I also saw myself. And so reading, the pleasure of the long sentence, the pleasure of the observation, the coming to understand that there is no detail written down that has not been observed by somebody, by an actual person, the writer. And so that every detail that you share is a choice as a writer. And that is one of those things about writing for yourself or writing for others. The memoir for me was a great learning experience because originally I was just making the notes for myself. And then you sort of turn a corner and you go, what do I need to give the reader? Because that is the relationship. I am giving the reader something. They owe me nothing. They don't even owe me interest. If I don't get a hold of them in the first two paragraphs, first two pages, that is not on them. That is on me as the writer. And that's very different than when you write for yourself, because when we write for ourselves, we are, of course, interested in our fascinating selves.
Well, so why do we need to read other people and other perspectives to write for ourselves?
To write for ourselves, not necessarily, although I can find it very insightful and very helpful. And sometimes things pop out of an unexpected corner, and illuminate something for me about my own existence, whether it's, for me, very profoundly, Bell Hooks's work, which illuminated things for me in my own relationships with both men and women and the world. Not necessarily reflecting something that looked like me, but certainly something that felt very much like me. So I think it's useful and illuminating. And as a writer, if you are writing for other people, it's like understanding that when you are writing, if you want to be able to evoke what you have felt, you first of all have to be open to understanding the feelings that you have, which include things that are not admirable, that are not heroic, that are shame and guilt and fear and resentment and revenge and envy. And you got to be able to hold all of that in order to write about it. You cannot draw a curtain over everything that is not pretty. And also, I think that you want to be able to create characters, whether you're writing creative nonfiction or fiction, who have depth, who have roundness. If they're just flat and villainous, bad people doing bad things, well, that's not that interesting. And if you only write them as bad people doing bad things, as opposed to, what makes people complicated and often bad, but still complicated, you don't want to miss out on that. And therefore, you want to read widely. You want to be able to see how the villain sees the story. Because villains don't sit around going, I'm awful. Yay. They sit around going, people are so unfair. I feel so badly treated. Why does nobody understand me? I'm absolutely doing my best, and I'm doing my best to make the world a better place. Why are people so unkind and selfish? And that's what makes an interesting villain.
Right. They do have a real self.
Right. And people do. Whatever, wherever it leads them, there is a self. And to me, that is always interesting. So I'm always interested in portraits of selves. I'm the kind of person, if I go to an art gallery or an art show or something, I'm going to like the landscapes, but I'm going to love the portraits.
What is the relationship then of, maybe in your writing, you just talked about it in this memoir about writing for yourself versus writing to be read. But the way that I just heard you, it sounds to me like your process includes, or maybe a learner's process includes writing for self when you're going to be writing to be read.
I think that you cannot completely disentangle them. Because if I am not writing for myself in some way, first of all, it's going to be bad work. It's not going to be interesting. It's going to just lie there like a burnt pancake. But also, I have my own drive. My great interests, probably period, but my great interests are love and language. And so I always want the sentence to be engaging. I am always interested in the difference between green, verdant, teal, and moss. And I'm going to think about those things. And probably even if I'm just writing for myself, I will think about those things. But when I'm then moving towards writing to be read, I hear how different the valences are, that those words are all charged differently, from the actual sound of the word, to the association we have to the word, to the history of the use of the word. All of those things come into play. And this also explains probably why I'm kind of a slow writer, because I think about these things a lot, but I think about them much more when I am working on a short story or something that I want to be read by other people.
Okay, so you are not a slow writer. You've published so many things in the last several years, and like just got lots going on.
Yeah, Joyce Carol Oates. She just makes everybody else look like a slacker.
Well, I'm really thoroughly impressed. So part of what I wanted to get to is this idea of the transition from writing for yourself to writing to be read, and like how does one even think about that, and how do you think about that?
Well, part of it, again, I think has to do with my feeling about what I owe the reader,
Mm,
which is not just myself, um, and whatever gift of language I can use to deliver myself, but also what do people need to know? And in my experience, often when you're starting to write, you think people need to know much more than they need to know.
mm,
If you are writing about your difficult experiences in middle school, you do not have to begin with, I was born,
mm,
or I had colic,
mm,
or I was late to preschool. You want to think about what is the heart of it? What is the sense of it? Where might we begin? I always say never begin at the beginning. You yourself as the writer will lose interest somewhere around year 3.
mm.
Never begin at the beginning. Begin in the moment. Begin
Mm,
in that moment that has stayed with you.
mm,
It is always with you.
mm,
Begin there. You
mm,
don't have to explain it. Just see it. Just see it in front of you like a movie. And
mm,
you describe what is happening. We don't have to explain who anybody is. That's that first moment of seeing.
mm,
And then you kind of build out from there. You add the scaffolding. But the moment, the engine is the thing that you see, that you want to say, this is what is happening. Not even this is what happened. I
mm,
am seeing it right now as if it is in the present. This is what I am seeing. I walk in the door.
mm,
And then you build it out in sort of a more expanded structure so that people can join with you.
mm.
But you always want to begin with something that actually matters to you, not with the explanation for why it matters to you. Explanations are really tedious.
Right. That's so beautiful because it really is very alive. Here's where, like, when I go to the place that I'm thinking about, here's what I want to show you. Here's
This
what I
is
want
what I
to describe.
see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Why? Why? Like, is it because it's interesting, or because it's alive, or because it's vibrant, or because it's meaningful? Like, what's
Well, you hope it's interesting, but it is. So if I am writing about getting my coffee this morning at my completely beloved luncheonette, which is downstairs from my office, I see the room. Now it was not a big moment. It was a little moment. I wanted to thank a friend of mine who had made Thanksgiving stuffing for me. And I'm seeing her at the back of the luncheonette. And I don't want to be rude. I don't want to get in front of the other people who are online, but I want to make a point of telling my friend how much I appreciate it. And then I'm standing there going, should I text her? Should I say it? So I kind of go around to the side of the counter so I can tell her. And then I back away from the other people and I get a cup of coffee to show that my intentions are honorable as a customer. And then I have to bundle up and walk out. And the sea is just roiling because it's so cold and it's so choppy. And I can actually begin to see little bits of ice forming on the white caps.
Mm,
But all of that is my experience. Now, later on, I might sift through it and go, Amy, nobody needs to hear about the bloody white caps if the point is friendship.
mm,
So then I begin to go, well, what is it that matters to me about this? First, I see it,
mm,
then I assess it. I don't assess it first.
mm. And did you know that the point was friendship? Because I didn't know that the point was friendship until you named it. Just yeah,
I
yeah,
did not. It's
yeah.
only clear to me now when I want to take out the white caps because the point is not maritime adventures. The point is the relationship in the luncheonette.
Hmm. So there's a way in which, like, you're describing it, kind of noticing that precedes the naming. Like, just let yourself notice, notice, notice,
Always,
notice, notice.
always. I mean, for me, always. I see it and I have a feeling about it, and that leads me to be able to name it and also to integrate it, to bring it together with whatever it is that I write about friendship because, as my children say, I only have, four subjects: love, sex, family, and death, which I think is plenty, but it is only four subjects. And love figures a lot in it. Love figures in my friendships and it figures in other kinds of relationships too. And so often that's where I'm going to find myself going.
Yeah.
But then you also don't want to write the same thing over and over again. And you're not trying to persuade your reader, or at least not for the kind of writing I do. Like sometimes people will say in interviews, what did you want the readers to come away with? And I have no intention about that at all.
Mm.
I don't write to persuade, and I don't write to recommend.
Mm.
I write to describe, and if I'm lucky, kind of illuminate this moment between people that I think matters.
Mm. You say you don't want to write the same thing all of the time, but a lot of writers write the same thing. A lot of well-established writers write the same thing. So you don't want to write the same thing, but
It makes me nervous. It makes me nervous, and it makes me feel bad. I just don't want to write the same story over and over again. And I don't know that I'm going to have Dickens's range of stories, or Toni Morrison's range, but I think it's important to me to not stand in the same place with every narrative.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I see that. I mean, Rick and I, my husband Rick and I have spent time this year with 4 of your works, from Normal to Away to Lucky Us to In Love. They're really very different one from another. So I've been a little
They
bit.
are. I mean, you hear the voice. If you're reading certain sentences of mine, they sort of sound like my sentences.
Yes.
I tend to have a really dim grasp of the comma, I'm sorry to say, and I like a run-on sentence. There's no doubt about it. If that sentence is going on for more than 2 lines, it's probably written by me. But I did want to write about very different things. Normal was that was my first nonfiction book. It was a really interesting experience for me, and I knew that my position in that book was going to be as an outsider every inch of the way, which was complicated because I like to be inside. I want to be inside the story and conveying that feeling. And this time, my job was really to convey what it was to be an interested and empathetic outsider, because there was no way, and it wasn't appropriate for me to pretend to be an insider to these groups for which I did not qualify.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about, I mean, maybe you've been doing this already, but how you think about teaching writing? Like, how do you create a space for learning through and from the experience of writing? It's too broad of a question. But
no, it's not. I mean, I think the first job really for me teaching writing is to make it both safe, emotionally safe, and also to stir the pot, to roil the water. My job is not to say, yes, you are just as gifted as your mother said you were. I have no comments. I don't feel like that's helpful. And also, it is my job to make it safe for people to write crappy sentences, for people to tell stupid stories that go nowhere, which the opening is flat and the ending is worse, in which the writer themselves is always the hero and everybody else misunderstands. We're all going to write garbage. It is the job. You're not willing to fail, you shouldn't write. Because it is every time. You talk about 7 times fall down, 8 times get up. That is what it is to write in a serious way. And you have to be willing to fall down. It's like ice skating. Do not ice skate if you're not willing to fall. And my job when I'm teaching is to make it okay. I mean, I have to say, I did a workshop for adults one time, and it was great because in the middle of like the 3rd hour, and people were working hard, everybody just cracked up because I invited everybody to read their worst sentence. And everybody read their worst sentence, and everybody was like, oh my God, that sucks. And we were all like, yes, welcome to the party.
Nice.
Because if you don't puke out the first draft, you can't make something beautiful out of it in the fifth draft.
Mm.
And so my job is to make it safe for people to do that, and also help people help people hold it up to the light and go, if I gave up a little of this, which mattered to me so much when I was writing it, that everybody should understand X, and I do a little less over there and a little more over here, it's brighter, it's clearer, it's more moving. Maybe not exactly how I had intended it, in which I was going to be the hero of every paragraph, but now something else is happening that's bigger.
Mm. I love that. And I do almost all of my work in groups. And part of the reason for that is something that you're pointing to, which is kind of normalizing the kind of foibles in the human condition, and making it safe enough to feel human. And, I'm in the teaching of, everyday leadership and interpersonal and group dynamics, but I think it's working some of the same way in letting
Very
yourself
much.
write, which is also writing about the human condition.
One of my great experiences when I was a graduate student in social work was a group class taught by just a brilliant guy. And I remember watching him work, watching him make a safe space that was nevertheless still provocative and eye-opening. And it was a useful experience for becoming a psychotherapist, but it was an enormously useful experience for becoming a teacher, because that's still what I wanted to do. And I also wanted to give people tools. One of my favorite classes ever, I taught something called Tools of the Trade. Mm-hmm. And I didn't care what writing background the students had. I didn't care if it was fiction, nonfiction, poetry, plays, policy analysis. I was like, a good sentence is a good sentence. Mm-hmm. Let's learn how to write a good sentence. Mm-hmm. Let's learn how to write a good paragraph. Let's learn how to write a narrative that does what you intended it to do. Mm. You ride the horse. The horse doesn't ride over you.
Mm. Powerful. I want to take that. I want to take that class. That sounds fun. The group work that's kind of connecting this is also about, you've said that your work often explores human condition in its like most kind of raw and unfiltered forms. And so maybe my question is something about engaging deeply with our own stories and how that can, it's like a becoming process.
Absolutely.
Can you comment on how that unlocks transformational learning?
I think that if you don't know your own story from lots of different points of view, my own story is my own story, but it's also the story of my particular experience as who I am, but also the different roles I have played in my life, the different jobs that I have had, all of which make me me. But if I don't have some insight into that narrative, if I don't understand how being a writer and being a psychotherapist are connected by my love of language and my love of story, then I'm missing something. I'm not understanding as well as I might be. So it's always, to me, worth holding up the anecdotes and the memories that we really remember and holding it up to light in a couple of different ways to see, what am I learning about this? Mm-hmm. What's being reflected towards me? I think, I think back to my childhood and I think about certain things that I have decided, this is a story about this. And every once in a while, I will look at that and go, is there something else to that story? So when I'm a little kid, I'm in the backyard and I'm playing with these two little boys, and one of them pushes me over the other one and they break my arm and they run off. That's sensibly enough. And I am aware that in my family, we have moved to a new neighborhood, which is much nicer than our old neighborhood. And I am aware that my mother does not want to make trouble. My mother does not want to go to the neighbor lady and go, your little crappy kid just broke my kid's arm. And she's not going to go. She's also not going to acknowledge that my arm is broken for a couple of days because she's so upset about it.
Hmm.
And I feel all of that. I'm about 7 years old. And I also recognize that my dad is going to go to the next door neighbor and go, your crappy little kid broke my daughter's arm. And all of that was a really seminal childhood experience for me. But sometimes when I go back to it, I find myself thinking, well, what else might have been going on with my mother or my father or our class relationship to this new community of which we were clearly not members? And also, what did I do with that information? How did that shape me and my relationship to community and my relationship to violence and my relationship to fear? So you get lots of rivers if you're willing to sit with it and look at it from a couple of different angles, not to discount any of them. Like, nothing gets thrown out. It just gets lit up so you can see it better and deeper, and you see how it goes forward into the future. I also get to see how it goes back into the past and how all of that swirls around you. It's never, to me, it's never an either or. You don't have to choose which is the true story.
In the way that you're talking about it, one not only has to kind of write through process, but also read through your own process. You have to read yourself.
I think so. I think that that's really worth doing, not because we're going to get the answer, but because it's useful to have answers. And it's really useful, I think, not to shy away from the less good stories, the less pretty stories, the less heroic stories, but to be able to sit with the ones that are really awful and the ones that are disappointing, as well as the ones that are a banner waving overhead. All of those stories matter.
You've got me thinking about, just taking a little wander through the things that I've been writing. And I'm not sure I look forward to that, but it feels important.
No, often one doesn't look forward to that. I mean, to me, that's a thing that you do in a corner with a cup of tea and a small light, and you stare out the window and you go, I probably should think a little more about that,
Yeah.
And why I am so committed to this version of the story. Is there another version of the story that'd be worth thinking about?
That's a hard question to ask when it comes to, memoir or
Yes.
reflective writing.
I'm always aware of the things that I am leaving out and how I am shaping the story. And I allow myself to do that partially because I am writing to be read. And so I am shaping the story in a certain way. It was very important to me in this memoir. I wanted people to love Brian.
Yeah.
That mattered to me. That was part of the tilt of the book.
Yes.
I could have written it with a different tilt, but that was part of the tilt. But I needed to know that that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I needed to do.
Oh, and wildly successful. I feel, just so connected to you and to him. Thank you for that. Well, is there anything else you've offered beautiful guidance here, some didactic and prescriptive, a lot embedded in your stories about writing, and is there anything that I haven't asked you that feels important in this?
I think I always want to say when people are writing, first of all, no one else cares about your writing. The only person who cares is you. Do not expect people to be sitting around cheering for you and demanding more pages. If that happens, that's great. That's not usually what happens because no one cares. And so either you care and you value that work and you take it seriously or not, which is fine. The world doesn't need more writers. If you ask writers, all they care about is more readers. No writer says, oh my God, I just wish there'd be thousands of more writers. We never say that. We go, more readers, please. So I think you have to take your own work seriously, not more seriously than it deserves. But if you're going to do it, then you give yourself some time and some space to take it seriously. And I think also as I said, make your peace with failing.
Mm.
And I think it's a great opportunity to communicate with yourself and with whoever that reader might be out there. I never have a particular reader. I think the other thing I say, which I hesitate to say because it sounds a little harsh, but when you write, you should write like everybody you know is dead.
Mm.
And no one is looking over your shoulder.
Mm.
No one is judging it. No one is assessing how you really feel about them. All gone.
Mm.
Nobody else. It's you and the laptop, you and the pencil. There
Mm.
is nobody else.
Mm. Freeing.
That's
Freeing.
what we try for.
Yeah. Well, Amy, such a pleasure. Thank you for putting such beautiful work out there and for coming and talking about your process and what we all might be doing to learn through experience through writing here on the show.
I am delighted. And I really will say again, I think especially as a writer, any kind of writer, you always learn through experience. You
Yeah.
know, it's to me, it's sort of like, that's what it's there for, to teach us something. That's the point.
Yeah.
So, you want to take it in and do something with it and never shy away from it.
Mm. Beautiful. Until
So,
soon, my friend.
so thank you so much. Thanks for having me.